readers, it's Lori. Welcome back to Throwback Thursday. I haven't done one of these for a little while, but I have been thinking about it all month and just didn't get to filming this one. What I wanted to bring you today is a nonfiction author. This is the last day that I'm posting this of Nonfiction November, but I thought this would be a good one for you to kind of carry with you as you decide, if you want to continue to read more nonfiction. Who might you want to choose? I have amassed a group of books written by this particular author. There are other books that he has written that are not set in this historical way, but these are the ones that I have and am hoping to focus on. The one that I've read is The Devil in the White City, and the author I'm focusing on today is Erik Larson. Now, this one I really loved because it was set in Chicago, and it was set during the World's Fair in 1893. So this was these are very shiny. This is quite old. I love this cover because it really does sort of represent the pageantry and the beauty of fairs and how World's Fairs were designed and implemented in such a complicated way. This also follows a serial killer named H.H. Holmes, who was at that time also going around and creating some scams and moving himself forward in a way that was quite tricky and deceptive, and he was quite a fascinating character. I would like to read more of H.H. Holmes, more about him. And I will say that I did enjoy this book, but it was very dense, and there was less about H.H. Holmes and more about the architecture and the building of the World's Fair, which I appreciated, but I wasn't so keen on the details of the architecture. So for that reason, I give you that sort of caveat. But if you love architecture, this would be a great one for you to read. One that I am very interested in getting to is In the Garden of Beasts. So this one follows. It says the blurb for this is Love, Terror, and an American Family in Hitler's Berlin. Indeed, a man named William Dodd, is the first U.S. ambassador to Hitler's Germany. And he comes at the beginning of what will become this brutal massacre of Jews and others that Hitler believed shouldn't live on the earth. And this man brings his wife and his daughter, as most ambassadors do, to Germany. And they are at first a bit, kind of getting acclimated. And the daughter, Martha, is finding that the people that she's meeting in the Third Reich are interesting and powerful men, and she's just kind of enamored with them, it sounds like, from the premise. But then they start to get news about some of the things that are happening and about Jews who are being murdered there in the surrounding areas. So Dodd then sends letters to the U.S. and says, you've got to do something. This is terrible. This is building into a bloody massacre of innocent people who deserve to live and be free. I have always wanted to find time for this. New York Times said it is by far his best and most enthralling work of novelistic history. I would say that The Devil in the White City did feel more like a novel when he was talking about H.H. Holmes. It did not feel so much like a novel when he was talking about the incredible detail of the architectural processes of the World's Fair. So I would love it if this one was read more like a novel. Dead Wake is another one, the Last Crossing of the Lusitania. Okay, so this one is set in 1915. World War I is about 10 months into its inception, and there is the Lusitania, luxury ocean liner that is setting out of New York for Liverpool, and it has a number of children and infants aboard as well as other families. The captain of the Lusitania, whose name was William Thomas Turner, had a great amount of faith in this ship's ability to withstand anything, including warfare, since they were, of course, considering where they were going and what was happening at the time. But the question was, could it survive all of that? And could Germany's attacks and Germany's plans influence the stability of this voyage with all of these people, souls on the boat? Here's what I love. As the Lusitania made her way toward Liverpool, an array of forces, both grand and achingly small, hubris, a chance fog, a closely guarded secret, and more, all converged to produce one of the greatest disasters in history. I can't sum it up any better than that. Somewhat like The Devil in the White City and Dead Wake, this one, Thunderstruck, is a different take on some of these similar themes. So this one follows two men, Holly Crippen, who is an unlikely murderer, and Guillermo Marconi, who created some supernatural means of communication. Okay, which actually means he had a discovery that ended up being something that made an incredible impact on the world. So this is in Edwardian London, in Cornwall, Cape Cod, and Nova Scotia. Thunderstruck is really kind of looking at this time, the trend to build these great luxury liners, as we talked about for the Lusitania, and how those luxury liners would communicate, how they would continue to sail and fare through difficult circumstances and communicate and find out ahead of time what were kind of the things that we needed to communicate from those ships, because that didn't happen for the longest time. So he created an invention, which was the wireless. Quite fascinating. But Crippen, meanwhile, starts murdering people. So again, it's kind of a dual. It's a dual sort of, architecture and serial killer and wireless communication and serial killer. But it sounds really fascinating. This one might be one that I would want to read over the others. I will say that these also are pretty thick and they have really small print. Then I also found in a library sale a copy of The Splendid and the Vile, which is about Hitler's reign and his family's and the things that his family and the things that he was doing during the war as he was moving forward as prime minister. On his first day as prime minister, Hitler invaded Holland and Belgium. And so this one really shows how Churchill created this space in England for keeping calm and carrying on, for being fearless, for understanding that they would do their best, that they would come together, that they would, against all odds and obstacles, that they would survive this incredible, devastating war. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be prime minister during this time, but I have read and watched a lot of other shows about this particular topic, but I do want to look at this book because he looked through diaries, archival documents, and secret intelligence reports that were, declassified in order to be able to write this and to include some of the details. And I also like that he talks about, and I did start this at one time and I just put it down for a little while, but he does talk about the impact of all of this on his family and his friends. And of course, how he was marshaling support from other countries as well as from people within England and the relationship, I'm sure, with the royal family during this time. So sounds wonderful to me. There is another one that I don't have yet, but it is one that I am interested in also, especially because this one involves a hurricane. So it's called Isaac's Story. The subtitle is A Man, a Time, and the Deadliest Hurricane in History. This one is set in Galveston, Texas, in the year 1900 in September, which is, for those of us who live in this area, kind of the peak of hurricane season is around late August through September. Those are months that are really tricky for us here to get through. And Isaac Klein was a meteorologist for the U.S. Weather Bureau at that time, and he failed to recognize and realize how impactful this storm was going to be. And preparation, of course, for a hurricane at that time is very different than preparation is for us now. In fact, meteorologists and other scientists are able to track not only almost the exact city where this hurricane may or may not make landfall, but of course they're able to measure the winds. We have pilots that fly through storms to gauge all of the data that we need to be able to do those things. None of that was available to them at that time. So this hurricane destroyed this little community and it killed over 6,000 people. And Klein himself was impacted by this hurricane personally. So that one is, yeah, it's a must read for me at some point. I will say that I think listening to these sometimes is a little bit easier for me than reading some of the denser, complicated material, but that's just me. It might not be the same for you. He has another one coming out in 2023. The title of this one is The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War. And I am highly anticipating the release of this one. It is set to release on April 30th, 2024. Of course, that could change because those dates are only really estimates. This book takes a look at the months before Lincoln is elected president, and of course, what's happening within the world at that time, and the hatred and divide around the rights and privileges that should be given to Black people, the concept of slavery, how difficult it was for the South to release that, and how the whole country was absolutely divided. So he talks about the difficulty right before the election, the shelling of Fort Sumter, and really kind of this growth into a new leadership and how that was really causing tension, chaos, fear, anger, hatred. One of the quotes in the synopsis of this book is that Lincoln himself wrote that the trials of these 5 months were, quote, so great that could I have anticipated them, I would not have believed it possible to survive them. It is very difficult to think about how that time must have been, living in the era that we live in now. I mean, not completely a stretch, given that we've had a political divide more than once in my lifetime for sure. And we have a lot of divide at the moment between the political parties for sure. This one sort of also focuses and features Major Robert Anderson, who's Fort Sumter's commander, and a former slave owner who is sympathetic to the South but loyal to the Union. That'll be an interesting discovery of how he was able to juxtapose those two things. Edmund Ruffin, who was a vain and bloodthirsty radical who stirred secessionism at every opportunity, and Mary Boykin Chestnut, who was a wife of a planter, conflicted over both marriage and slavery, and seeing parallels between both. Okay, I'm ready. I'm definitely ready. So, of all of these, which one will I start first? I don't know. That's a good question. I'm kind of torn between Thunderstruck and Isaac Storm. Of course, I would have to acquire Isaac Storm. Maybe I would do sort of the two of these, pick one of them and then later go on to the other, since they're both kind of about us, the development of, ships and wireless communication, which of course brought us so much more technology than we probably ever would have dreamed possible at that time. I hope you enjoyed this Throwback Thursday today and learning more about this author. If he's new to you, if he's not new to you, let me know what books of his that you have read and which ones you've enjoyed, or maybe just suggest which one you would read first if you were going to enter into this stack. Always wishing you a happy reading day. Bye.